Yo, welcome in everybody. Today, we are power ranking all 12 CDL teams' new rosters after Rostermania before Vanguard. There's obviously going to be a ton to go over, the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses of every single team in the CDL, and power ranking these guys in tiers and going through it one by one. So with that said, I think we can get right into this one and talk about these teams. Let's get right into it. Let's go. Alrighty, so here are the tiers we are rocking with today. We got the Chalked tier, the Dark Horse tier, Contender, and Elite. So we'll be slotting all these teams into these tiers, and we'll be ranking them 12 through 1. So the farther to the right you are, the higher you are up on the list. So let's get into this one. So at number 12, I mean, there's not really any surprise here. We got the two Chalked teams, all right? These are the two teams who have yet to have any real roster news. These teams don't currently have a roster. And let's talk about this. Nrg and Paris Legion are currently the two Chalked teams. And I have them evenly here at 11-12, tied for 11th or 12th, because I mean, neither of them really have a squad right now. To be fair, I don't think either of these teams are like 100% guaranteed to be the worst teams in the CDL, because there's a lot of talent here out on the market still. And so you could put together a pretty solid team, but we're probably not going to hear anything about these teams at least for a little while now. I mean, we're not even sure what's happening with the NRG spot, which is in Chicago, now that Optic and Dallas will be merging. So, and like I said, I still think you could build a really, really solid competitive roster, like a, 12 through 6 type team. But I would be very, very surprised if either of these squads can build a top 6 team out of the players that are remaining in the CDL, unless they are nitpicking the perfect squad of 4 here from the amateur scene, from the guys that are remaining that aren't currently on rosters. So it seems like a long shot. I'll keep those guys in the Chalk tier for sure. So with that said, now we can kind of get into the juicy talk of the episode. Go through some of these teams in the Dark Horse tier, in the Contenders tier. And so off the rip, this is a team that is really hard to decipher what they are, who they are, what their identity is. And that's the Seattle Surge. Obviously, this roster is Accuracy, Mac, Sib, and Pred. So Mac and Pred will be running the SMGs for this squad, with Sib on Flex and Accuracy on AR. And so the question comes down to, like, what does this look like for Accuracy on the year, and the upside slaying potential for a guy like this in a game very similar to Modern Warfare, and the movement and play style in this game. Like, this team, Search and Destroy, I feel like S&D could be a problem for this squad. Could be a situation where they're just going to really continue to struggle with it on the year. But again, there's also a world where Pred is the real deal. He's like a legit unbelievable talent, where he's like a Hydra, where he's literally that good on SMG. He's a literal difference maker in the CDL. And then you have a guy like Sib, where he also has a world where he's a legit mainstay flex in the CDL, like a dashy type player in the CDL for the long term. And then Mac has been consistently very good now for 2 straight years since he joined the CDL in the middle of Modern Warfare on New York. At that time, he used an SMG when he came into the league. And then last year, he switched to being a flex, basically running Krig for most of the season. And so there is a little bit of debate about whether or not Mac could run an SMG as effectively. Last year, he was definitely better on an AR. And so that is a debate about exactly how that upside and the SMG duo-ness of Pred and Mac would play out on a squad like this. And then you have the temperament issues that we've heard a lot about with Sib, and how he could mesh with Accuracy, and whether or not Accuracy can reel him in and really organize these troops. This team is like the definition of a dark horse, where if all the things go right for this team, they finish top 5 or top 6 for sure. But things could go horribly wrong for this team. We could see multiple roster changes on the year with this team, like where maybe you see Accuracy getting subbed out for a different AR, or Mac isn't performing well and then he gets subbed out, or Pred doesn't work out, he just doesn't fit with the squad, he gets subbed out. There's a lot of different ways that this could go. And so that's why I think Surge, there's just not the confidence level there as there is with some of these other mainstay teams in the CDL with the rosters that end up coming out here from Rostermania. So we'll keep Surge here at number 10. So at number 9, this hurts me because I really had a lot of hope for this squad heading into Rostermania, with the potential of maybe a Vivid joining this team, or a Hook joining this team, maybe ASIM joining this squad, one of these really, really solid SMGs joining this squad, and that's Florida. So there's obviously a lot of question marks here. Their squad is going to be Skies, Awakening, more than likely Dave Patty, and then as well Havoc. The question marks here with the squad though, I mean, Havoc, the upside seems to, it's questionable. And this team's recipe for success would be a very similar situation, I think, to maybe like Toronto, where you have like Havoc as Bance, and then now with Awakening running an SMG, you know, Awakening can really level up, be an unbelievably aggro SMG, like a Kleenex, who can really get in your face, play all around the map, and really does a good job of playing off of his ARs. And then Dave Patty's basically like your Insight, and then Skies is Cammy, a playmaker, a Slayer, and then this team could really mesh. But there's a lot of different variables here. They didn't really show the flashes of it, like that top 4 type upside that we saw even with Toronto last year in Modern Warfare. And then now it kind of led into this year's breakout, heading into 4v4 from 5v5 and shaving down that roster a little bit. That's why, again, it's just like there's a lot of moving parts on this team, a lot of variables. Like, how good is Dave Patty? Like, is he gonna work out? I was pretty high on him, you know, especially last year, and hoping that he could get a shot this year. So it'd be really fun to see if that ends up being the case for this Florida team, which all signs are pointing to that is what's happening here. So as a whole, it's just, it doesn't give me as much confidence. But again, I really believe in the talent of Skies. I really believe in the talent of Awakening. And I think that those two guys alone can keep them here in the dark horse tier and really keep them competitive throughout the year as a team that can really upset some of these really solid teams once in a while throughout the season. But it's hard to imagine this team having the mainstay elite slaying power and the elite SMG duo to be a top 5 type squad in the CDL, and that's why they're in the dark horses. Next up is one of the teams I am most excited to see actually happen or actually play, and that is the London Royal Ravens. Okay, so Afro, Nasty, Zero, and Gizmo as their squad. I mean, Nasty and Afro could be a wild tandem here on SMGs. Then you've got Zero running a flex, Gizmo on AR. All of that makes a lot of sense to create a really solid, balanced team. Of course, Gizmo would be an X factor with how good can he really be versus some of the other options that they had to potentially keep around, like whether they wanted to keep Paul X around or they wanted to go a different direction, like a Wuskin route, you know, or something like that. Or another one of the main ARs, European players, which is a lot of really good ones. And so that'll be something to keep your eye on with this roster. So Florida and London are really close in my head. But again, usually when it comes to tiebreakers, you want to give the tiebreakers to the SMG duo, and the prospects of Afro really breaking out and emerging as like a top 10 SMG consistently on the season moving forward is really high. And so they're kind of my favorite dark horse pick right now as a team who could end up finding their way inside that top 5 after the first few weeks of the year. But this is a team you gotta keep your eye on. Nasty's a ton of fun. There's so much upside with a guy like him, but there's also a world, again, where this team could crash and burn. Afro still has his shining moments and they look pretty good, but they could never really emerge inside that top 6. And that's a very real possibility. So I'm gonna put them kind of as a hot take above Florida, but I could see that going either way with both of those teams. They're very close in my head, so I feel like maybe I should even move them a little bit closer together. Something like that. Alrighty, so that sends us into our Contenders tier. And this is where it gets interesting. It gets really mixy. It gets clustered here, all right? So there's gonna be a lot of teams we're gonna be talking about here in the Contenders tier. Also, all of these teams legit have a chance, like a really good chance to win champs. That's why I feel like there is a pretty significant tier break from the bottom 5 right now. And then these top 7, all of these guys could be legit fantastic teams in the CDL consistently. So first team up on the list, because there are more question marks with this team than there are with some of the other ones, and that's the LA Guerrillas. First of all, it's just exciting to see that logo even in the top half or the top, you know, the top 2 tiers in our tier list videos. That's a first. So shout out LAG for signing a very good roster. So this is Slasher, it's Gunless, it's Hook, and it's Asim. The squad of 4, it's been officially announced. It was the first team to get officially announced, actually, which again, really solidifies the rest of the teams for sure happening. And these are all, I would basically say, locks to happen at this point. So anyway, long story short here, you're looking at the SMG duo of Asim and Hook. And we saw Hook last year have a lot of problems, not just in game, but like out of game, of course, with the disputes with Crimsix, and then heading over to LA Thieves, and you had like a weird situation where it felt like he was just being like lazy or being like a little bit less put together than he should be when it comes like the COVID tests and not being on time and those types of things that were problems when normally Hook hasn't ever really had those problems, or at least hasn't been known to have those problems in the CDL. So that was a little bit surprising. But heading into this year, you've got two guys who really like to have a lot of control, and that's Gunless and Slasher. Of course, we're bringing back their Rise Nation World War II duo. And then back in World War II, Slasher and Hook team for a little bit at the beginning of the season. So there are these past connections with this roster. Asim's the new guy on the block who hasn't teamed with these guys before. And so the Asim Hook duo is going to be very, very interesting to see how it plays out. And then it really comes down to my confidence in Asim being like a fundamentally great CDL player year in and year out. I think he's a very solid player for sure. Like he's in that top 24. But my thing with the team is the lack of like the elite S tier player, because at this point, I'm not sure if Hook is that. And I think Gunless is a very, very good player. I think Slasher is a very, very good player. Same thing with Asim. But this team feels a lot like the Rocker before Standy. They could have a lot of success, and they have like mainstay talent in like Priesta and mainstay in leadership and attach. And we had seen like accuracy in Major Maniac be very, very good. But this even feels like what the Rocker were when they were in their struggling stage, even after bringing attach or bringing Standy in, where they had a very, very good player in Standy, but they couldn't really figure it out as a team, and then it didn't really click until they brought Major Maniac in for accuracy. I think they have a little bit more upside than the Rocker did at that point because of the SMG slang with Hook and Asim. That's the question mark with this squad heading into it, and that's why they kind of just fall behind some of the other teams when it comes to the confidence in the mainstay ability of this roster. I really like this team inside of Hardpoint for sure. Then it comes down to the Search and Destroy and how Hook can play with Asim in Search and Destroy. We've seen Asim in his career have some struggles in S&D. And so it comes down to then can Slasher and Gunless kind of organize the troops and keep them all together as a unit heading into this game. So that's why it's a really fun roster, and a roster I'm really excited to see what could happen with, but I'm not convinced will be a top 4 type squad on the year. Okay, so now we're inside our top 6, all right? This is what gets really interesting. So the Minnesota Rocker are at number 6. And these top 6 teams are all unbelievably great. And I mean like really, really, really great. Legitimately, any of them could win COD champs. Obviously, you know, there's some favorites near the top, but all of them have a legit chance. And the Rocker are an interesting one because I still have a little bit of question marks with them game to game and the consistency and their slang upside versus some of the other teams here inside the top 4, top 5. And I think the Rocker are going to be a fantastically competitive team, throughout Vanguard or throughout the whole year. The question is can we see that level up from Priesta or Attached to be a mainstay Slayer consistently in Respawn? And we saw that at flashes at times where Priesta, like in stage 5, when they won the stage 5 major, Priesta was incredible. And it's just hard for me to buy into them getting back to that point on a consistent basis when compared to the other 5 teams we're going to talk about here. So that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to kind of award the Rocker that top, 5 type situation here. But again, I love Standy. All of these players individually I really, really like. Major Maniac is the question mark when it comes to like slang upside in the long term, where again, we've seen the flashes of it, and like at champs in stage 5, I mean, Major Maniac was a legit beast. And that is what we were waiting to see from a guy like that. But again, it's just when you compare him to like the Octanes or the Arcides or Celiums or those guys of the world, it's like, do you really have that belief that he can bring that on a consistent basis against the best teams in the CDL week in and week out? And that's where I probably don't when you compare him to those types of players. So at number 5 now, this was really close between 5, 4, and 3. And that's why they're all in the same tier here, because these teams could be very, very close together. I think between basically everyone, and especially myself, with how I'm ranking these guys. So the New York Subliners are at number 5, and I was really tempted to put them at number 3, but it just came down to there's just a few more variables here. So like it really comes down to like, we know Hydra is unreal. He's a locked and loaded top 10 player in my book in the CDL. Hydra is fantastic. And then Clay, he's got that that connection with Hydra, kind of like the big brother type aspect there. And Clay's really, really good to have with Hydra. Then you're gonna bring in, of course, Crimsix and Neptune. And so those become some pretty big variables where definitely Crim can bring it, and he can be a very, very good player. And in Search and Destroy on the season, we saw him be fantastic at finding those first bloods, bringing that consistency to the team. And then Neptune's a big time X factor where he could be absolutely insane. He could be their Shotzzy this season, the Halo guy, the movement, the gun skill, the overall finesse that Neptune will bring to that team. And you pair him with Hydra, it's really, really, really scary. So they could be that Simp and Abizi like duo. But the question is, when you line up, you know, Clay and Crim across the map from some of the other guys here inside the top 4, it's like I just have a little bit more consistency in some of those other ARs or flexes, and that ends up being the X factor for me when moving the Subliners back. But what I do want to say is that I really have a lot of faith by the end of the year, this team will be as consistent as it gets, and that could be the difference in some big time matches and some big time matchups inside tournaments when these guys are playing. And so there is like an X factor aspect with having Clay and Crim on the same team when it comes to strategy, consistent setups, fundamental team play that I really, really like. And then you're pairing that with 2 fiery SMGs with a ton of upside. And that's why this roster is a ton of fun. And I'm about as excited for this team as I could be about anyone in the CDL. So up next here at number 4 is the LA Thieves. All right, their roster of Kenny, Draza, Octane, and Envoy. That's a really fun team. Right off the rip, I want to say that I do think that at the beginning of the year, they could start off slow, and we could see them struggling for a little while to try to figure that out, and it might take them a little bit of time. But once they figure this thing out, they have as much upside as anybody in the CDL with the natural playmaking ability of Envoy paired with the slaying and just natural gun skill of Octane. And then you have Draza, who has a ton of upside. We've seen those flashes of him taking over matches previously. And then you have Kenny and how great he's been at basically with every single gun in the CDL the past year and a half. He's been fantastic. And with a little bit more consistency and hopefully more LAN tournaments next year, this team should be all in on trying to win and bring in championships to LA Thieves. And it's very possible this team could be absolutely insane and be right there with the competition with FaZe and the other squads up there at the top. My first question mark with the team then would be the pairing of either Envoy and either Draza or Kenny as the main SMG duo. So we don't for sure know which player, whether it be Draza or Kenny, would be the main SMG duo with Envoy. I would lean it to be Kenny because we're heading into a World War II game. He's gonna have those SMGs back, but again, in Modern Warfare, it could go either. It's a Modern Warfare engine. After the gameplay we've seen lately, it could go either way. And I could see Kenny really wanting to use like an STG in this game or whatever it is, or the bar, and then letting Draza do that, because Draza was really, really good this year, even with the 74U in hand. So that'd be the only question mark where it comes down like, how does Envoy play with one of those guys? And then that could end up being an X factor for them, and that would be the only way I could ever see them making a roster change, is because the roles just don't totally fit, even though they're all insanely individually talented. So that'd be my only question mark. But I really, really like the prospects of this squad, especially in Hardpoint and just in Respawn as a whole. S&D could take them a little while to get used to and kind of figuring out their strategies and their setups and how they want to play together. So I could see this team being a little bit underwhelming in Search and Destroy, at least at the beginning of the year. But I mean, like, we've seen Octane, even though his teams haven't been that great in S&D, he's been very, very good. And I think we all have a lot of faith in him in those like 2v2 or 1v1 situations to clutch up and find those dubs. And I really think that this team could be very, very competitive, and they'll be a mainstay top 4 team on the season with that squad of 4. Now there's some really interesting conversation here depending on the contender or elite tiers and how I want to put these guys in. So obviously we've got 3 teams left. We've got the Ultra, we got FaZe, and we got Optic Dallas, the Optic Dallas squad. And this is interesting. So I have Optic Dallas inside the Contenders tier here, rocking and rolling as the 3rd team in the CDL. I could definitely see an argument for Toronto slipping out of the elite tier and like kind of like in the mix here with these guys inside the Contenders tier. So I guess I'll just reveal the top 3 we can talk about. So we got Toronto, and then we got FaZe pretty far ahead of the pack still as the top team in the CDL. So my first thought with this is, FaZe is kind of in a league of their own still at this point. I mean, we saw the Ultra get really, really close after stage 2 to beating them many times. We saw Optic beat them a few times, but when it came down to it at COD Champs, no one was really that close to Atlanta FaZe when it mattered the most. And the only thing that could really stop FaZe from being probably the best team in the game, or for sure a top 2 team in the game, is really themselves. It comes down to motivation and do they really want to be the dynasty they claim they want to be type debate. If that motivation isn't fully there, then maybe you could see them slip, kind of like how you see like in the NFL or the NBA, where teams might have like championship hangovers. The drive and the passion and those X factor things just end up not being there the following season, and it doesn't click as well as it did the previous year. And so those are the debates to make for Atlanta, but on paper, this team should still be the best team in the CDL by far, and really without debate. They're just too balanced. It comes down to the S&Ds are just fantastic, and they've got a great coaching staff. And then the hard points and whatever the third game modes end up being, whether it's CTF or Control, is great. And I think for the rest of the CDL's sake, if it ends up being CTF, then at least you feel like you have a lot better chance against FaZe than you do against in Control. Because on the season, I mean, dude, FaZe was undoubtedly the best Control team, and it wasn't even close on the year. So, you know, there is that debate where it's like, hopefully for the rest of the CDL's sake, we have CTF in. Otherwise, FaZe might come out and just dominate again. But that really is a pretty big X factor as a whole when it comes to our conversation heading into this year. So as for the Optic Dallas roster versus Toronto, I want to talk about Toronto first, because there is a world where I could see this team not clicking like they did in Cold War, where they got so close and it feels like they maximized their potential. We heard the rumors about Kleenex trying to find a max contract with another team or get the bag with somebody else. At least he was interested in trying to find a potential other roster if the opportunity was right. And so there were those things, and that worried me a little bit with the idea of the Ultra heading into this season. But again, on the year, they showed us no reason truly for why they couldn't be a top 2 team. And we saw Cammy, we saw Kleenex play very good Call of Duty in Modern Warfare, and Insight was one of the best AMs in Modern Warfare. And so heading into this year, it's like they should still be a very good team, but I could see a justified argument for having Ultra behind like Optic or LA Thieves or the Subliners probably, and then having them at the number 5 spot. I'm not opposed to that. And I'll probably have to think more about that moving forward as we get closer to the game and closer to the start of the season. And maybe when we do our bold predictions episode, I might talk a little bit more about the Ultra here on the podcast. But they are a team that you got to keep your eye on, because there are some variables here heading into a new game on the Modern Warfare engine. So as for Optic Dallas, I've talked a lot about them at length now, like on videos or in the podcast or, you know, in different avenues about this team on stream, just talking about them. I really like this team, and I really like the Scump Shotzzy duo. This is a guy that Scump never has really had in his career, like a elite slaying, fast-paced SMG to play with Scump. And Shotzzy really has no problem being that quote-unquote entry guy, or isn't willing to go into the hill first 60% of the time compared to his other SMG. He's very comfortable with that. And we saw that even more. We saw that at the beginning of the year with Hook, and we even saw that at the end of the year where Shotzzy was so confident in winning those gunfights that he was just flying in and he was winning those gunfights. So I think that duo is a ton of fun. And then Dashy, you just know what you're gonna get with a guy like that. Not to mention, he brings sniping upside, and you have Ilya on this team as well. I think this team is a locked and loaded elite, like top 3 S&D team on the year, especially if you bring Rambo in as a coach as well. I mean, this team's gonna have, I think, really good teamwork by the end of the year. And Ilya is an X Factor player, obviously. He's primed to have a very good year with this squad, and puts him in a really great position with high vibes. I mean, this team's gonna be the vibiest team in the CDL. Their laughs in scrims or in streams is going to be quality. I think they're gonna have a great time playing Call of Duty together, and they're gonna have a lot of upside slang with that squad too. And so I think they're gonna have a lot of fun playing respawns, and they're gonna have fun playing the game together. and that's going to keep Scump engaged. And overall, I think this team is really, really scary. The X's and O's, the intangibles are there. The only question mark for me is that communication, where like, you know, Dashy isn't known as like the greatest communicator in game. Illy's interesting because I think Illy can really step up and be an in-game leader, but he doesn't have like that veteran status. So it comes down to how does Scump feel about Illy's in-game knowledge and where does that relationship and that dynamic lie? And then Shotzzy's generally been a very solid communicator, but he's not oftentimes like the shot caller, the big picture type guy in respawns that is using that over that bigger communication. And that's where I'm a little bit worried because Dashy's that main AR for this team, but in his career, he's generally not been the bigger picture in-game talk, like playing for the spawns and communicating positioning and team positioning and lines of sight and blocking spawns, like those types of things that generally many ARs need to really over communicate, and they don't necessarily have that guy on their team. So we'll see how Illy really fits into that communication role for the squad, and that would be my only real question mark. But the X's and O's of this team on paper is insane, and I love the prospects of this team in Search and Destroy. So overall, I'm very excited about Optic Dallas, and that's our power rankings, man. 12 through 1, 1 through 12, the best teams in the CDL heading into the beginning of Vanguard here in about a month and a half or so. And so I'll be very excited to see what you guys have to say down in the comments below. Drop all your comments down there, and of course, hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And of course, like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you guys really enjoyed it. But as always, guys, I'm your boy SalvationsElite, and guys, we will see you next time. I'm out.